Welcome into Rounding the Bases, the podcast about culture and leadership with a baseball twist, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust, hashtag no stopping you. Enterprise Bank and Trust was founded by entrepreneurs with the core focus of serving privately owned small and medium-sized businesses who have a story to tell. Enterprise Bank's commitment is to listen, learn, and guide clients to a lifetime of financial success. Enterprise Bank, together, there's no stopping you. My name is Joel Goldberg, coming to you usually from the Kansas City Audiovisual Studios. I'll be back in there later this week, but actually downtown at WeWork in the Lightwell building. Always enjoy coming down to one of the WeWork offices, have some stuff going on, some good socially distanced moderating activities today. And so I'm down here, which means the podcast goes a little bit on the road. My guest today maybe doesn't need an introduction, but everybody needs an introduction, right? Jason Kander has taken off in recent years on the political landscape and much more, by the way, too. He is president of the Veterans Community Project and is leading the organization's national expansion. Former Missouri Secretary of State. He served our country in the military, nearly won a race for Senate in Missouri. He has founded Let America Vote, a national campaign against voter suppression. He has a podcast, a very popular and often listened to podcast, Majority 54, which debuted at #1 on iTunes in the country in 2017. He's a best-selling author, New York Times best-selling author. His memoir, Outside the Wire, ran for mayor of Kansas City. But then, in shocking news, I remember exactly where I was when it happened. He decided to drop out, focus on himself to seek treatment for post-traumatic stress that he had been struggling with since coming back home from Afghanistan. It's quite the story. He is also, not single-handedly, because his wife is included in this too, the actual reason why I became a speaker and how I started doing all of this. And I give them a lot of credit, Jason and Diana Kander. It is good right now to visit with my friend, Jason Kander. Jason, how are you?
I'm awesome, man. That was a great intro. That was the kind of intro where I feel like we're on the radio. Like it was high energy. Like we're gonna take a caller, and we're coming back from break. And anyway, good to see you, Joel.
I don't know. It is good to see you. I feel like I haven't seen you in forever, although I see you all the time, the way I see everybody else virtually and all that stuff. And I think generally the conversations are quick little texts here and there when I want some. Used to be that you would text me for inside information. Hey, what's going on with the Royals? Now I feel like you're more plugged in than me, so I'm always looking at information from you. But man, I'll tell you what, a lot has changed in your world. And I don't just mean the way that you went and took care of yourself, but the new responsibilities you have, also being now a father of two. This last 2020, as crazy and challenging as it was, I assume in some ways was a very good one for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you feel a little guilty, maybe talking about 2020 being a year that you could enjoy at times. But yeah, like we're very fortunate. We were able to be in a position to sort of weather a lot of what 2020 brought. And at the same time, September 25th, our second child was born, Bella Brave. So now we have a daughter, and she's a great baby. I mean, we're super spoiled. She sleeps through the night already. And so in many ways, 2020 was good. In many ways it wasn't. But personally, I mean, yeah, we had a really good 2020.
It's such a crazy time. And, one of the things that I love about your podcast, Majority 54, is that it is geared towards in this climate that we're living in, where you're either on one side or the other. Like, I don't know whatever happened to the middle. I'd love to see some people find their way back to the middle and actually try to work on both sides. That's a discussion we're not going to solve today. But you really focus on how to talk to people and how to address issues when it's always black and white, and how to maybe connect a little bit better. And I'm just curious how much of a focus that is for you guys on the podcast. You have a very loyal following, and for the most part, a following that is going to be on one side. But more times than not, I hear you saying, here's how to talk to that uncle. Here's how to talk to that friend without having that nasty fight. How important has that been?
Really important. I mean, what's really interesting about it is how it all started. I mean, back in 2017, it's for people who follow me, it's not a big mystery or a big reveal to say that I was basically getting ready to run for president, 2017, 2018, and that meant I was all over the country. So I was campaigning, and I think I hit 47 states in about a year and a half. And I would do these, quick speeches, and then I would do Q&A, and it would be like, whatever y'all want to talk about. And because I had, come from Missouri, and I had, gotten a lot of people who had voted for Trump and voted for me, even though I wasn't exactly in the middle. I mean, I'm a progressive. One of the number one questions I got, like most common, was, how do I talk to my aunt? How do I talk to, my best friend from high school who has gone, I feel off the rails politically, but the relationship means a lot to me. And I want to convince them. I want to do my part and bring them around to our way of thinking, but I don't want to lose the relationship. Or in some cases, it was just they keep wanting to talk to me about this stuff. I don't know what to say to them because they're crazy or whatever. And so I found that I had some insight on that kind of thing. And so that's how the show started. It was just, hey, this is for people who want to convince other people, but don't want to lose the relationship. And my argument is that's super important, right? Because like if you think about it, like how do we try to persuade people? Like TV ads, tweets, all that kind of stuff. Well, the problem there is like, everything is getting tuned out, but you have credibility with the people who you go to church with, the people who, your kids both are in the same class. Like you have a relationship already. And if all of us who think a certain way use that credibility and use those relationships to try and say, no, here's how I feel about this, you're going to persuade a lot of people. And so that's how the show started. And we really enjoy doing it. And it is really gratifying how many people we hear from every week who are like, I think I may have brought my mom around, or at least my mom and I can talk now. So yeah, I really enjoy doing it.
I think the key too is like, I mean, obviously as a politician, former politician, I think still, I mean, however you would label yourself, you're in the political world. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's not, I mean, obviously, if you're running, you want to get as many votes as you can. But it seems to me that just in the world of decency or lack thereof, which is a whole nother discussion, which is such a product of social media and this, need to have everything right now. Everything is so reactionary that at the minimum, if you can get people to get along a little bit better, you're ahead of most people in the game.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's so important that the way we do it is every week we just take the most divisive stuff in the news and we just go through it and we go, okay, how are you going to talk about this with your conservative brother-in-law? And so I think it is very helpful, but also like for me, it's just fun. I mean, I do it with my co-host Ravi Gupta, who is just a brilliant guy. And I would, frankly, like the reason I relaunched the show is Ravi and I were having these conversations once a week anyway. And I just thought, well, we may as well record them and do Majority 54 again. And so it's been fun for me, and I think it's been helpful to people.
I'm just going to interrupt things right now and just say that my mom has already chimed in and said, "Tell Jason hello." So I'm glad that she's watching. She's watching. She has just seen it. So you have a lot of fans, obviously, around the country, and this is such a. I mean, none of us have ever experienced a time like this. I don't really care what side you're on politically. Now, to me, there are two sides to what is going on in terms of insurrection. There are the insurrectionists, and there are actually the patriots, those that love this country. That part is easy. Then the politics continue to get away in the way, which is maddening. But how do you process all of this right now? Because no matter what side you're on, at least for the first time in my lifetime, last week to me, and so we're recording this the week after the Capitol was stormed, and by the time this comes out on iTunes or people are listening to it, God knows what else might potentially happen, which is a very scary thought. But how do you process the fact that, in my opinion at least, our democracy was threatened for the first time in my lifetime? This was the first time that I looked and said, I never really thought, or maybe I took for granted our democracy because it's what we've always had. I've always known how special it was. but I never thought about it in terms of what it would be like to live in a country that didn't have that. And suddenly that was challenged, in my opinion, and many people's opinion. So how do you process what's going on?
Yeah, it's been challenging to process it, frankly. I mean, it's particularly, like, personally, as somebody who served and who, I remember being in Afghanistan and seeing things happen and thinking, well, I'm really glad I live in a country where that would never happen, right? And then it's just at a minimum confusing to then, several years later, having, not to put too fine a point on it, like, risked my life for these ideas, all this stuff that we learned in school growing up about how it's supposed to work and sort of the sacred nature of it. And then to see it so, frankly, like, easily and becoming so fragile, it's really confusing. And
Yeah.
the other day, I was in the car and I was listening to NPR, and it was just headlines. That's all it was. It was just headlines about what had happened. And I remember being struck by the fact that it didn't sound like I was listening to headlines about the United States. It sounded like international headlines about a country that you would have sort of a vague idea of how to pick it out on a map, and sort of a vague idea in your head of, like, what the scene would look like. But really, it would usually just kind of wash over you as more of the chaos that comes from around the world. But no, I mean, it was a description of our own country. And so there's a lot of input right now that can make you feel really cynical, and it can steal your hope away. But I try and sort of focus on a couple of things. One, this all happened, on Wednesday the 6th. On Tuesday the 5th, the state of Georgia, which, is Georgia, right, elected to the United States Senate a liberal black preacher who preaches from the pulpit of Martin Luther King Jr., same church, leads the same congregation, and a liberal young Jewish journalist. That's who, the day before, that's who Georgia decided would be its Senate delegation. Now, again, going back to what you were saying, whether you are left or right, regardless, what that at a minimum means is that the majority of Americans, given that also meant that the Senate balance changed after the White House control changed, and that if you look at the entirety of the Senate delegation for the Democrats, it actually represents 40 million more Americans than the other side. And even if you're a conservative, you can still look at that and say, okay, at a minimum, that means that the vast majority of Americans look at what happened on Wednesday, the following day, and are just as horrified by it as the rest of us. So while this happened, and we have to deal with it, and we have a lot of rebuilding to do, I do find some sort of idealistic safe ground in the fact that the vast majority of people are horrified by this.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't know if it feels like it's unified people, though, and maybe that happens after the peaceful transfer of power and we move on. I don't know, but I think back to 9/11. To me, and I might be wrong, this is subjective, I suppose, but to me, this was the scariest, most tragic event in our country outside of 9/11 in my lifetime. People may say others. I certainly remember the Oklahoma City bombing well, and many other incidents. But I bring that up because I know that September 11th really moved you and had a major impact in your life. And that moment really unified the country. I mean, people unified around President Bush, no matter which side you were on. And it was, I am proud to be an American. And I'm curious your thoughts on, what it takes to get to that point. Or maybe we are, and we're flooded by extreme views on social media. I don't know.
No, I think it felt a lot like 9/11 to me. I totally agree. And so I think that you're right in that what we have here is we have something deeper right now than a political problem. We have a cultural problem. And I also do think that we are not, as a people, and politicians say this all the time and it's trite, but I'll unpack it a little. As a people, we are not as divided as it appears. but the reason that I feel that way is because if you think about like right when quarantine and the lockdown started, and back in March, there was a feeling in the country that also was a little like post 9/11, and it lasted a couple weeks. And what interrupted it was, frankly, President Trump and other parts of the government that were in charge at the moment decided that it would be more politically advantageous to be divisive. And so leadership is a huge part of this, right? President Bush, in the wake of 9/11, did some things right. He was calling for unity. He wasn't trying to blame anybody politically. He was doing the stuff that you would expect an American president to do. Now, I think we could have remained a lot more unified, and we could have, I think, gained a lot more as a country going forward out of that moment had he done some things that were really controversial that, understandably in that political moment, I think a lot of people would disagree with me. But, instead of telling people go shop, it could have been like, I'm going to call for national service. And I'm not talking just military, like mandatory service of some regard. And I feel really strongly about that, and I've been talking about it lately, because I don't feel like we just have a political polarization problem. We have a cultural polarization problem. Americans don't know each other anymore. It's the longest period in American history without mandatory service. There's more than 3 channels on the TV. So there's a real lack of shared experience. And we really need to do something quickly to make sure Americans have to know each other again, because we are faced with the problem of, what does it mean to be American? I mean, is it that 1 in 3 people watch the Super Bowl and, everybody has a strong view one way or the other on like Kanye West? I mean, that's not enough for a national identity. And like here in Kansas City, it's, what are we doing to make sure that if you live west of Troost, you have genuine relationships with people who live east of Troost? Not enough. And as a country, not enough. And so I think we've got to think really big if we're going to heal the country in the long run.
I have one other question on this topic, and I never served in the military, but I have to think that when you serve in the military, a bit of what you're talking about here, you are exposed and get to know people that you would have never known before. It's one of the beauties of my job, and I know like all the athletes make a lot of money and all that, but you start to meet people from different countries, different backgrounds, guys that grew up poor, guys that grew up rich, guys with different views. And so it's a little bit of a bubble. It's different. I'm not living with them the way that you did, but I feel like I've been exposed, and even just in my early years of media, where in St. Louis, I could walk in to a high school in a neighborhood with $1 million homes, and the next day walk into a high school with metal detectors in the inner city. And what I learned was people are people. I mean, it's you. When I hear somebody now say, "Ooh, Ferguson," I say, "Well, yeah, I've been there." I mean, and they're amazing people. And and people say, "Wait, you're going to East St. Louis?" Yeah. I mean, look, there are plenty of places I wouldn't go in the dark of night, and that's not just bad neighborhoods. I lock my door everywhere I go. Maybe that's different when you live out in the country or something like that. But people are people to me. And so my question to you is this: when we hear about some of these insurrectionists and these rioters, and you're starting to hear that they were military, which scares the hell out of me, because I start thinking about in movie terms Rambo and guys that could just shoot things up and know how to do that. You knew some of those guys. Like, is this stuff happening? Like were you serving with guys like that? Did you know?
No, I didn't know that I was. I mean, there's one guy that I'm aware of who, just from following his social media, who I served with briefly, who's just gone nuts.
Yeah.
To the point where some friends and I, like, at one point were like sent a tip to the FBI, like, "Hey, you should probably watch this fella." But that's out of the thousands of people that I served with. So let me start with the first part about like serving with people and what it does in terms of feeling like gaining an understanding that people are really not that different, and then we'll go into the issue of like the military veterans involvement in this stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Like, serving with people made a huge difference in my perspective. Because, like, let's be real about how I grew up, right? I grew up in a family that had money, had resources, as a white kid in Shawnee, Kansas. My family's always been from KCMO, but my folks took a job over on the Kansas side. So I grew up in Shawnee, Kansas, a suburb of Kansas City. And just about everybody I knew was also a white kid whose family had resources and grew up in Shawnee, Kansas. The only difference was I was the only Jewish kid that I knew. Other than that, there was really no reason for me necessarily to grow up and meet a lot of people who were different. Like, I went to school on the East Coast, so I met mostly at school white kids from suburbs on the East Coast who had grown up with I mostly met a bunch of people who, were me, but talked faster, right? Like, that's it. And so there was it wasn't like my life was on a trajectory to be exposed to a lot of other Americans and to be able to, put myself in their shoes at all until I was in the military. And then in the military, I served with people of every different color, every different background, everything. And they were my family for large periods of time. When I was in Afghanistan, when I was in training for intelligence school, when I was in, training to become an officer, at any given time, like, you're just living with folks who you all may be very different, but you're all going through the same thing. And you very quickly realize that everybody really wants the same stuff. Everybody has different perspectives, and you realize that that's very valuable. And it's one of the interesting things about, like, the whole conversation about diversity in the workplace and affirmative action. Having led soldiers in the military, I understand that that's not a thing you do just to check the box or just exclusively for fairness. You do it because it makes your unit stronger. Having different people from different backgrounds with different experiences, it makes you stronger as a unit. So I learned all that stuff in the military, and it's the reason that I was able to go into politics and be, a progressive from the city who could do well in a state like Missouri, because I just didn't have a problem going into a situation and being like, I don't know anything about this. I guess I'll ask a bunch of questions, because I feel no need to pretend that I understand what it is to grow up on a farm in Lamar, because I'm just comfortable in situations where people are not like me. And so it's extremely valuable, and it's why I think we need some form of mandatory service. Now, to your other question, I think veterans are like anybody else in that, depending on what's going on in their life, they can be vulnerable to, radicalism and to recruitment. And I think if to any extent there is an increased concern of that kind of thing, and I don't know that there is, like, among vets, if it's like higher than the rest of the population. But I would just say, in the case of veterans, one thing that we have to remember is that, less than 1% of the population serves. And when you come home, and this is a big problem with post-traumatic stress and people adjusting to coming home generally, when you come home, it can be very confusing and disorienting that nobody really understands what your experience was. And you've gone from having this enormous sense of belonging and being part of something to now you're supposed to find meaning in stuff that doesn't seem as meaningful to you, and the people around you don't understand your experience. And it's why we lose a lot of veterans to suicide. And it's responsible for a lot of things. But we also have to be mindful of the fact that when someone is in that situation, whether they've come out of the service or whether they're struggling with mental health issues maybe or whatever, and they don't feel that they belong, they are vulnerable to being recruited to any kind of cult, any kind of radicalization, because it may offer them a sense of belonging. And it's no different than like what we learned back in intelligence school, or what I learned all those years ago, which was, I remember one of the instructors who had been downrange in Iraq coming in and saying, look, here's how a bomb cell works, like a terrorist bomb cell overseas. And he'll be like, it's 4 guys. One of them is a true believer and is the expert who makes the bombs. The other 3 are just guys who don't have jobs and don't have meaning in their life. So you can go and try and track down those 3 guys and, capture or kill them, or you can make sure they get a job and they have some sense of meaning in their life and some sense of belonging. Either is effective. One of them is a much greater risk to you and your safety and to them and theirs. And that always rang true with me and made sense. So I guess the overall point I'm making is that, yeah, we have to be thoughtful about the fact that people and I'm not in any way absolving them, but whether it is the radical right or whether it, the radical, like, and when I say right, I mean the extreme fringe fascist, violent right, or whether it is, ISIS, people who don't feel a sense of belonging in the world are targets for this sort of thing, and we have to be mindful of that.
Oh, it's a really interesting perspective too, that I suspect no one comes home from having served in a place like Afghanistan or Iraq without some type of baggage, for lack of a better term. You can't just come back and that goes away and move on with the snap of a finger. Some maybe are able to do it better than others, and some struggle with it, for years and a lifetime. And I think you're in many ways the poster child for that, because you were living what seemed to be just this perfect life. And in many ways, I'm sure it was. I mean, you've got a beautiful wife. You had an amazing son. You had a great career. You had a voice. Yet you said, I need to step away and get help, which was a very public thing. No one had to know about it. You were in all likelihood going to win mayor of Kansas City. I remember exactly where I was when I heard the news. I mean, it's that big of a deal. And a lot of that is because we're friends. But I mean, I was walking out of Cristo Rey School in Kansas City, having just done lunch with a student that I was mentoring. And I saw that, and I just stopped for 5 minutes, and my jaw dropped, and think, wait, not Jason. And, you've heard that from many people. So I just want to know, what it took to get to that point, one, and two, what that stepping away did for you, because I see you with so much energy, even more than you had before now.
Yeah. So to get to that point, I mean, it was a decade of telling the world and really myself that I didn't have post-traumatic stress. And we could do a whole episode on that. But I mean, I guess one way to explain it is just that, I think one of the misconceptions is, because you often hear people say, well, we've got to make sure that combat veterans understand that it's strong, not weak, to get help. And that's true. And it is helpful. But what I think a lot of folks don't understand about that is that it's not a matter of us always thinking that, well, it's weak to get help. It's deeper than that. It's that there's a very necessary form of brainwashing that goes on when you're in the military. And I say necessary because it's literally necessary. I mean, it is, in order to get, I was an intelligence officer who went out and collected information, meaning I took meetings with people, when I was off the base and people didn't know where I was, and I was practically alone, and you're very vulnerable, and you're meeting with people who you don't really know their intentions. And so there's a high risk of being kidnapped or killed. In order for me to, I was aware that was dangerous, but in order for me to keep doing the job, I needed to believe that everybody else was doing harder stuff, and it was no big deal. And it's the same no matter what you do. If you're an infantryman, for you to keep going out and doing patrols when you and your friends are getting shot at, you've got to believe that this is no big deal compared to what, second platoon in your company is doing. A buddy of mine said to me at one point about all this, he said, somewhere there's a World War II vet, like in a VFW hall, explaining that, yeah, I was first wave at D-Day, but I was in the back of the landing craft. It's not a big deal. And it's because that's what they train us. And it's necessary in order to have us do the job. The problem is they don't really flip that switch off when you leave. Nobody sits you down and is like, all right, you should know, like, that's not normal. And there's probably going to be some stuff that comes up for you as a result, and that's expected. And really that's would be the bare minimum. I mean, there's a lot more to be done to flip that switch back off. So as a result, for 10 years, in my case, while I'm dealing with violent nightmares, never getting a good night's sleep, hypervigilance, which is to say feeling that I'm in danger and my family is in danger and the people I care about are in danger all the time, feeling the world's a very dangerous place, emotional numbness, and a degree of like self-loathing and shame for not having done enough, and all of that. Then, when you're not sleeping and you're experiencing all that, then depression becomes a symptom of all that, and then suicidal ideation becomes a symptom of that depression. When that's all happening, if you were never sort of deprogrammed from the idea that what you did is no big deal, then it's very difficult for you to say, well, this is post-traumatic stress. I can lay claim to that. I can take that mantle and I can go get myself help, because by doing that, you feel like it's what we call in the military stolen valor. It's like saying, well, what I did was as good as what this other guy I served with did, right? And we're programmed not to do that. Not to mention the fact that, like, you then are trying to do what you always did in the military, which is just gut it out, right? This must not be that big of a deal. And then eventually for me, that became, this must not be related to my service. I'm just like this. And I became resigned to it. And that got worse and worse and worse, to the point where my coping mechanisms, like, my career and that kind of thing, just weren't doing it anymore. They weren't quieting the noise. And I spiraled, and it was time to step back. And as to the second part, as to how life has changed, I mean, it's been over 2 years now, since I decided to get help, and I'm a completely different person, as as people who know me know. My priorities are completely different. I'm much, much happier, and I'm enjoying my life. And my work has changed. I'm still, involved in politics, but my day job and where my focus is serving my fellow veterans, and I find it immensely gratifying. And so I guess the message for people is, like, you don't have to have gone to war. It doesn't really matter what your trauma is. Trauma is trauma. If it's still intruding upon your life and disrupting your daily life, like, you should get treated, because it's completely worth it.
Well said. So let's talk about Veterans Community Project and what's going on with that, and just the purpose that it's given you in life. We talk about finding that why all the time, and I really sense that once that happened, you really found a new why.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So for context for folks, Veterans Community Project is a Kansas City-based organization, started here by a group of combat vets, of which I was not one of the co-founders, but a group of Iraq and Afghanistan vets who looked at veterans homelessness and general veterans services and said, I bet we can do this better. And they went out and they just said, if we could do this from scratch, if there was nothing to stand our way, what would we do? What they came up with was a walk-in clinic, an outreach center for all vets, no matter what the manner of their service was or how long it was, combined with a village of tiny houses with wraparound comprehensive case management services for homeless veterans. And as a result, they have made an enormous dent in street homelessness among veterans in Kansas City, and like saved a lot of lives in the outreach center as well, including mine, because I toured Veterans Community Project and was just blown away by it in August of 2018. And then 6 weeks later, I made, thank you, there's the link. And what a pro, man. Amazing.
Veterans, for those that are just listening, I popped up a link on the video, veteranscommunityproject.org. Continue, please.
What a pro. And so so 6 weeks later, I went to the VA to, say, like, hey, Jason, Army, here's the last four of my social. Can I get some help? And it turned out the process was a lot more onerous than I thought. And here I was, phone full of influential contacts, high level government experience, law degree, and I was lost as to what to do next. So I texted my buddy Brian Meyer, who runs VCP, Veterans Community Project, and he said, come on in. So I ended up going into the outreach center 6 weeks after my tour, but I went in at that point just like any other vet in Kansas City. The thousands of vets who had, they expedited my paperwork, got me into the system at the VA quickly, and made a big difference for me. And about 6 months later, they had all these invitations from communities around the country to expand nationally. And Brian said to me, hey man, like, I was hanging around there a lot by that point. And he said, you've built a national organization before, we haven't. You want to just come here and do that? And I was like, yeah, I think I do. So now I'm the president of Veterans Community Project. We have broken ground on an expansion site in the Denver metro area. We are getting ready to break ground on land that we've now acquired in St. Louis. And then we're really close in about 3 or 4 other cities as well. And so I love it. I mean, I literally, my job now every day is to help Americans get home safely, which is, all I really joined to do in the first place. So, veteranscommunityproject.org.
All right, so everybody should definitely check that out. Continued progress for VCP, which is amazing. Let's shift gears. Time for the baseball themed questions brought to you by Kissick Construction, trusted team, reliable partner. Check them out at kissickco.com. Other than marrying your beautiful wife, Diana, which is clearly your biggest home run, what professionally is the biggest home run that you have hit?
Yeah, I guess I should have thought about all these questions beforehand, right?
No,
So
you're good on your feet.
Okay, all right, good. Professionally, the biggest home run that I've hit is one that is actually mixed with the personal, which is that I'm not sure that I'll ever do anything more impactful in public service than making the announcement that I did and going public with what I was struggling with, because it is the only thing I've ever done where it has resulted in I have met or heard from many people, hundreds, if not thousands of people who have literally said, "You saved my life." And so I can't think of anything that could top that.
No, there can't be anything better, truly, when you're saving lives like that. Second question, swing and a miss. What's a swing and a miss you've taken, and what did you learn from it?
Well, I ran for the United States Senate and I got the silver medal. But we did really well in that race back in 2016, and we outperformed the top of the ticket by, I think, more than anybody in the country. And I guess what I learned from that was that if you try to do something and you have an individual failure in terms of you didn't meet your objective, that doesn't mean it was a waste of time or anything like that. It's what can you gather from that experience? And in my case, I mean, I don't know, like professionally, I gathered quite a lot. Like I remember on election night, not that this is the only way to measure things, but in terms of influence and platform, I mean, on election night in 2016, I had 17,000 Twitter followers. And right now, I think I have like 375,000. And clearly we did something in that campaign that got people's attention, and I ended up with a national platform to do all sorts of things, which for a few years was, politically and career-wise very helpful. And now my platform is currency for me to advance Veterans Community Project, which is an incredible way to be able to use it.
I am not a Twitter envy type of guy, by the way. I am an Instagram envy type of guy because I'm trying to build that Instagram following, and that's a much more difficult process than Twitter. I mean, Twitter can happen overnight, right? Mine happened because of Royals, you know that, and you and I.
Well, I mean the Instagram envy thing.
It's harder to build.
Here's why it's harder, Joel, for guys like you and me, because Twitter is here's what I think, or here's what I know, here's some information, right? Which people are very, a lot of people are very interested in hearing the information or the thoughts that you and I have to offer. Like they're interested in us writing them a 180 or whatever character note occasionally. People are less interested in pictures of us doing what we do. And so as a result, it makes Instagram harder. And so I think of Instagram as that's for me, that's the most dedicated fans. Cause I literally, my Instagram following is roughly, it's roughly 10% of my Twitter following. And I figure okay, 10% of the people who follow me on Twitter are I'm interested enough in this guy to know what he ate for breakfast. And so if I can maintain that 10% ratio, I feel like I'm providing some good content.
I do like the sriracha on cottage cheese, by the way. It's really good. I thank you for that. As soon as I'm done with this juice cleanse today, I'll get back to that tomorrow. I was just going to say though that I don't I've never looked at anybody and been like, boy, I wish I had the amount of Twitter followers they did. And I've got 80 something thousand seems like a lot to me. And then there was one day where I looked and I'm like, you got a lot more Twitter followers than me. This isn't just the Secretary of State of Missouri anymore. And I looked up and I'm like, okay, but that's when I knew that you had this national platform, which was really amazing. And you can do something with it, obviously, as you talked about. Last baseball themed question, small ball. What are the little things that add up to the big things for you?
like right now in my life, it's interesting how it's completely switched from 2 years ago. So if you had asked me that 2 years ago, like what are the little things, I'd have probably told you something like, calling people back and shaking every hand in the room when you go in, and writing thank you notes and all that. And it's none of that now. I mean, now the little things that add up to the big things for me are all on the personal side, right? I mean, it's the fact that this morning with my son, we had a really funny conversation in the car on the way to school. And I know that like I was able to, start True's day off that way. And that started my day off that way. And that's going to make a big difference in my day. And I know that like there is a hole in my schedule today where I'm going to work out, which I try to do about 6 days a week. And I know that's going to make my day better. And I know that's going to make the 3 work meetings that I have in the next like 2 hours. I know I'm going to do better in those meetings because I've done these other things.
Yeah, I'm trying to get there too. And it is amazing what happens when that just becomes part of your daily routine. Whatever it is that you need to be successful, that you can't skip on that. So I'm learning that. Okay, 4 quick final questions as we round the bases. The first question is, how long did it take you, or was it one take to assemble the gun?
Yeah, you will be unsurprised to hear that I've gotten that question before.
I'm sure you have.
So I got it on the first take, but I always say I don't know which take they use because they play around with lighting and they do it over and over. The harder part of doing that, by the way, was not the assembling the rifle. I mean that was muscle memory. It was there's obviously no teleprompter on the inside of the blindfold, so you got to memorize the lines, and then you're also timing it so that, because the soundtrack of the ad was, there was no sound, it was there was no music, it was just the noise of the assembly of the weapon, and so you're trying to say your words at moments where the weapon is not making noise. But yeah, I got it on the first take because I'd practiced it, and then after that they just did, okay, we're moving the camera, we're doing all that stuff. So I don't know which one they used, but I did get.
All right, I figured that was the case. For anyone that has no idea what I'm talking about, just Google Jason Kander ad, campaign ad, gun, whatever, and you'll find it is one of the most well done and most talked about political ads, really, in recent years, if not of all time. All right, second question: who would have ever thought that sushi in Columbia, Missouri, was so good? But it was a life-changing experience for me, and you probably don't really remember all the details of that night, but for me, just to fill people in, I wouldn't have this podcast right now. I wouldn't have written the book that I did. I would not be a speaker. I never thought about those things. I was happy being a baseball broadcaster, still am. And then I'm out to dinner one night with Jason and Diana and True Kander, because I've been calling some high school basketball tournament in Columbia. And Jason made a suggestion to me. I thought he was crazy. You should start a speaking business. And I thought, well, my name's not Tony Robbins. What in the world would I be doing that for? So 1, I'll use my second question to thank you. 2, I don't know how much, if anything, you remember of that night, but I had no idea what you were talking about.
I remember it well. And one thing I remember is the only reason I knew to say that is because Diana had at that point already had a pretty vibrant speaking business going, and now it's taken off even more. And so really, I remember thinking, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but Diana does, so I'm just going to say this. And if I recall correctly, I think that was the first time you and Diana had ever met, actually.
Yeah.
Because I was Secretary of State, so we were living in the middle of the state. So you and I would hang out when I was in KC, but you and she hadn't met. So I was really just teeing her up to like teach you about it, which she did, and so she deserves all the credit. I was just smart enough to know that she could help.
By the way, I tried to get her on this podcast first. We were set, and then something happened to cancel it. So whenever she ends up coming on, we'll make it clear that she was the first choice. That leads me to my third question as we round the bases. You're one of the smartest guys I know. What's it like being in a house where you are the second smartest?
Reassuring, and thanks for saying that I'm one of the smartest guys. I appreciate it. Not only, by the way, am I the second, is she a lot smarter than me? I consider myself to be in pretty good physical shape. And the other day I realized, so my son and I were, we like have plank offs, like, we plank and we see who can beat the other. and I'm okay at it, but like he can plank for like 7 minutes. And it occurred to me the other day that out of the 4 humans who live in my house, I have the third best plank. And that's only because it's only that I'm not fourth because Bella's 3 months old. And
give her some time.
she's just working on lifting her head and doing pretty well at it. But anyway, yeah, it's fun. And I have a family of characters who are pretty bright. It's fun.
Yeah, you do. It's awesome. Amazing family. All right. Final question, the walk up. I was going to ask you Royals or Chiefs, but I know how you feel about that already. So let's go back to politics. I know you're not going to tell me that you're running for this or that or running for president, but clearly you can do anything that you want. So what's the long-term goal, or do you still not know?
Well, the way my life has changed is I really don't have long-term goals so much. For myself, I have long-term goals for my family and for Veterans Community Project. I mean, so I guess my long-term goal is to end veterans homelessness and to put in order to do that, to put a Veterans Community Project in every city in the country. And, I guess as a former politician, like that can sound kind of evasive, but to explain it a little, in the past, I always knew like I'm going to run for this and then maybe I can run for that. But a lot of that was a product of, when you're going through something internally and you're in this turmoil, the present is very unpleasant. And so it's very natural to think about the future all the time and to sort of live in that headspace. But now I'm really enjoying what's going on in my life. And so as a result, like, I don't think about, well, I could do this and this and this. I'm thinking about playing men's senior league baseball this summer. And so that's like a big thing for me. I've been like trying to get on a throwing program for my shoulder. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I think about now. I mean, the longest term personal goal, Joel, that I have, honestly, is, I coach True's Little League team, and all of his buddies from his school are on his Little League team. And I'm just, I do sort of have this long-term fantasy that like, if I coach all these kids all the way through 8th grade, when they become freshmen in high school, like, I don't see why you wouldn't let me be an assistant coach on the high school team if I've coached all the kids who just came into your team. Like, that's about as long-term personal as my goals get, is like maybe being an assistant volunteer high school baseball coach in like, 5-6 years.
Well, I think there's some great lessons there for people listening and watching too. And we all have plans and goals in certain ways, but to live in the moment too, to focus on right now and make those little improvements every single day. You should recruit Alex Gordon for that men's league baseball team. You guys would run the table every single day. So
see, he's old enough. Because it's a 35 and over league.
He's good. He's 36.
Yeah.
It makes you look old.
I know, doesn't it? Like, I've reached. I mean, you've been there a while, so you don't know this, but I am officially. I'm 39 and I'm turning 40 in May. I've officially reached the age where almost none of the guys who I watch, or gals who I watch compete on TV and in sports, are older than me. Now it still feels like they are, right? Like the Alex Gordon's, like, I'm like, oh man, he's like the old man in the clubhouse. And then I realized, like, I'm 3 years older than that guy. Like, it's an interesting inflection point in life.
I got news for you. My moment of that was when, this is a weird thing, when Jason Giambi retired, and I interviewed Jason Giambi once, real nice guy. But when he retired, he was the last active player in the league older than me. And this is probably 5-6 years ago now. And that was when I officially knew that everyone that I was covering in the league was younger. And then you could find 2 guys on any team combined that were younger than me. Brad Keller and Adalberto Mondesi, born on the same date. And when my birthday's in May, I'm older than the 2 of them. When their birthday's in July, they jump ahead of me. I don't know where I'm going with this, other than the fact that we're getting older, but it's good to be here. And we could go on and on all day long. But I know you got meetings, you've got stuff going on, and I'm proud of everything that you've done. I'm proud of the way that you have reinvented yourself personally and taken care of yourself. So grateful for the friendship. Can't wait to have Diana on at some point. Well, we could talk bad things about you, but we won't. You know that. So congrats on everything. I want to let everybody know jasonkander.com for websites, and also veteranscommunityproject.org. Jason, thanks for spending time today. Hope to see you in person soon. And, we'll talk, I know, very soon.
Thanks, Joel. This was fun, man.
I appreciate it. Yep, same to you. All right, great to visit with Jason Kander, and that is going to do it for another episode of Rounding the Bases. Shout out to my sponsors, Kansas City Audio Visual, Kissick Construction, and Enterprise Bank and Trust. Businesses often come to Enterprise Bank because they demand and frankly are worthy of more than the status quo and need a local partner who understands their business. Thank you all for listening and watching. Thanks to WeWork, the Lightwell building downtown, for hosting, and hope to catch you next time on Rounding the Bases.